Welcome to Champion Stories. If this is your first time here, subscribe now and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And now, on to today's story. The December morning in Manila carried the familiar aroma of Barako coffee and the characteristic bustle of Filipino streets awakening to another day. Manny Pacquiao adjusted his sunglasses as he walked along the uneven sidewalks of Tondo, the same neighborhood where he had spent part of his turbulent childhood. At 44 years old, the retired world champion still felt a deep connection to these streets that had witnessed his first steps toward greatness. The purpose of his visit was simple: personally supervise the distribution of food packages to needy families in the area. Part of his charitable foundation that had been operating quietly for years, Manny always preferred making these visits without media fanfare, away from the spotlight that had followed him since becoming a worldwide boxing legend. As he observed the morning activity, his eyes caught a scene that made him stop abruptly. Across the street, a thin boy, approximately 10 years old, was carrying a stack of newspapers almost the size of his own body. The faded shirt hung loose on his bony shoulders, and the worn rubber slippers could barely stay on his small feet as he ran between cars stopped in traffic. Manny's heart immediately tightened. The image of the boy overlapped with his own memories from decades ago, when he himself had walked these same streets selling cigarettes, candy, and anything that could earn a few coins to help his family survive. The memories came like waves: the constant hunger, the fatigue that weighed on his child's shoulders, the iron determination that kept him walking even when his feet ached and his stomach growled. The boy approached a red traffic light, taking advantage of the moment to reorganize the newspapers in his arms. Manny noticed how he carefully checked each copy, making sure they weren't wrinkled or damaged. It was the same obsessive care he himself had with his products as a child, knowing that each perfect newspaper represented the difference between eating or sleeping hungry. Without hesitation, Manny crossed the street with determined steps. His security team, which had been discreetly accompanying him a few meters away, was caught off guard by the sudden change of direction. The champion approached the boy, who was now trying to get the driver's attention with shy gestures, raising the newspapers without much confidence. The proximity revealed more details that broke Manny's heart. The boy's eyes, large and expressive, carried a premature maturity that he recognized perfectly. It was the look of someone who had grown up too fast, assuming responsibilities that should belong to adults. The small fingernails were dirty with newspaper ink, exactly like his used to get when he was the same age. The traffic light changed to green, and the movement of cars resumed. The boy ran between vehicles with practiced agility, offering his newspapers with a mixture of hope and resignation that Manny knew intimately. Each rejection was received with a small, respectful nod, and each successful sale was celebrated with a discreet smile that momentarily illuminated his tired face. Manny remained standing on the sidewalk, watching every movement of the boy with an intensity that surprised even himself. It wasn't just nostalgia or compassion he felt, but something much deeper. It was as if he were looking directly at his past self, at the boy he was before becoming the Pac-Man, before the world championship belts, before fame and fortune. The boy's movements were methodical yet desperate. He would approach each car window with rehearsed politeness, holding up the newspaper just long enough for the driver to notice, then moving on when met with a closed window or dismissive wave. Between sales, he would count the coins in his pocket with the precision of someone who knew exactly how much rice each peso could buy. Manny watched as the boy carefully avoided the deeper puddles on the street, protecting his newspapers from the moisture that could ruin his entire day's potential income. The care and responsibility in such a young child struck him profoundly. This wasn't just about earning pocket money. This was about survival, about contributing to a family's daily needs. In that moment, a silent decision formed in his mind, a resolution that would change not only that boy's day, but possibly the entire trajectory of his life. The traffic light changed once again, and the boy returned to the sidewalk near where Manny stood. Up close, the champion could see even more clearly the details that made his chest tighten with emotion. The child's worn-out shirt had small tears near the collar, mended with mismatched thread, that spoke of a mother's careful hands trying to make clothes last as long as possible. His shorts, several sizes too large, were held up by a piece of rope serving as a belt. Manny noticed how the boy organized his remaining newspapers with mathematical precision, counting them twice to ensure he knew exactly how many he had left to sell. The gesture was so familiar, it felt like watching a movie of his own past. He remembered doing the exact same thing, calculating how many more items he needed to sell before he could return home with enough money to contribute to the family's dinner. The boy's technique was surprisingly sophisticated for someone so young. He had learned to read the faces of potential customers, approaching those who seemed more likely to buy, while avoiding the ones who clearly had no interest. When a jeepney stopped nearby, he quickly positioned himself near the passenger window, knowing that jeepney passengers often bought newspapers to read during their commute. A middle-aged woman in the jeepney noticed the boy and began searching through her purse. Manny watched as the child's eyes lit up with hope, his small body practically vibrating with anticipation. The woman found a few coins and exchanged them for a newspaper, and the boy's grateful smile was so genuine it could have melted the hardest heart. What struck Manny most profoundly was the boy's professionalism despite his age. After each transaction, he would carefully fold the money and place it in a small plastic bag hidden in his pocket, protecting it like the precious resource it was. He never rushed customers or showed impatience, even when they took a long time to decide. These were lessons that couldn't be taught in school. They came from necessity, from hunger, from the weight of responsibility that no child should have to carry. As Manny continued observing, he noticed something that made his heart race. The boy had a small scar above his left eyebrow, barely visible but definitely there. It reminded him of his own childhood scar, earned during a particularly difficult time when he had fallen while running to sell newspapers before school. The parallel was almost too much to bear. The boy's movements began to slow slightly as the morning progressed. Manny could see fatigue setting into his small frame, but the child pushed through it with a determination that was both inspiring and heartbreaking. He had probably been up since before dawn, helping prepare for the day before heading out to work the streets. A group of construction workers passed by, and the boy approached them hopefully. Most ignored him, but one man stopped and bought a newspaper, even taking a moment to ruffle the child's hair affectionately. The simple gesture of kindness made the boy beam with happiness, and Manny realized how starved for positive attention this child probably was. The champion found himself studying the boy's face more intently, searching for something he couldn't quite name. There was intelligence in those dark eyes, a quick wit that became apparent in how efficiently he navigated the complexities of street vending. This wasn't just a child going through the motions. This was a young entrepreneur forced by circumstances to develop business skills that many adults never master. Manny's hands unconsciously formed fists at his sides, not from anger at the boy, but from fury at the circumstances that forced children into such situations. He had been there himself, had felt that same mixture of pride in his ability to contribute and shame that he needed to work instead of just being a kid. The moment had arrived. Manny could no longer stand by as a passive observer. Something deep within him, a combination of recognition, empathy, and protective instinct, compelled him to act. Manny took his first step toward the boy, his heart pounding with an intensity he hadn't felt since his biggest championship fights. Each stride brought back a flood of memories so vivid he could almost taste the dust from those old Manila streets, feel the weight of his own childhood burdens pressing down on his young shoulders. The distance between them seemed both endless and instantaneous. The boy, whose name Manny would soon learn was Bayani, was completely absorbed in his work, unaware that one of the Philippines' greatest heroes was approaching him. He had just finished serving a customer and was reorganizing his newspapers when a shadow fell across his small frame. Looking up, Bayani's eyes widened in confusion, then recognition, then complete disbelief. Manny's presence seemed to freeze time around them. Other street vendors nearby began to notice, whispers starting to ripple through the crowd like gentle waves. The legendary boxer stood there in simple clothes, without any of the fanfare that usually accompanied his public appearances, making the moment feel surreal and intimate. Bayani's reaction was a mixture of shock and instinctive respect. He straightened his posture as much as his tired body would allow, clutching his newspapers closer to his chest as if they were precious treasures. His eyes darted between Manny's face and the ground, clearly overwhelmed by the unexpected encounter with someone he had only seen on television screens in electronics store windows. Manny could see himself so clearly in the boy's posture, in the way he held himself with dignity despite his circumstances. The champion remembered the few times celebrities or successful people had noticed him as a child, how it felt like validation that he existed, that his struggles mattered to someone beyond his immediate family. The crowd around them began to grow as people recognized Manny, but he remained focused entirely on Bayani. With gentle gestures, Manny indicated his interest in buying newspapers, but his actions conveyed something much deeper than a simple transaction. He was treating the boy with the same respect he would show to any successful businessman, acknowledging the legitimacy and importance of his work. Bayani's hands trembled slightly as he selected his best newspapers for the famous customer. Manny noticed the boy's careful attention to detail, how he checked each paper twice to ensure it was perfect, and how he counted out the correct change with mathematical precision despite his obvious nervousness. These were the habits of someone who took pride in his work, regardless of how others might view it. The exchange of money felt ceremonial, weighted with significance that went far beyond its monetary value. Manny made sure to handle the transaction with deliberate care, showing the same seriousness he would bring to signing a $1 million contract. In doing so, he was communicating to Bayani that this work was legitimate, important, and worthy of respect. As Manny accepted the newspapers, he noticed something that made his breath catch. Bayani had a small notebook tucked among his papers, with what appeared to be calculations and notes about his daily sales. The sight of this makeshift business ledger, maintained by a child who probably wasn't even in high school yet, struck Manny with the profound realization of how much responsibility this boy carried. The champion found himself studying Bayani's face more intently, seeing not just his own past, but glimpses of potential futures. There was intelligence there, determination, and a work ethic that many adults would envy. This wasn't just a child selling newspapers. This was a young entrepreneur learning life skills that no classroom could teach. People around them continued to gather, but Manny created an invisible bubble of privacy through his focused attention on Bayani. The boy seemed to sense this protection and began to relax slightly, though his eyes still held a mixture of awe and bewilderment at finding himself the center of attention from someone he had idolized from afar. In that moment, Manny made a decision that would transform not just the remainder of this day, but potentially the entire trajectory of Bayani's life. The newspapers in his hands felt like a bridge between his past and this boy's present, and he knew he couldn't simply walk away. The weight of the newspapers in Manny's hands felt insignificant compared to the emotional weight of the moment. As he looked down at Bayani, he could see the boy processing the reality of what had just happened. The child's eyes kept darting between Manny's face and the money now safely tucked in his small plastic bag, as if trying to convince himself this encounter was real. Manny noticed something profound in Bayani's demeanor that went beyond mere starstruck wonder. There was a recognition there, not just of celebrity, but of something deeper. Perhaps the boy sensed a kindred spirit, someone who understood the weight of responsibility that sat on his young shoulders every single day. The crowd around them had grown larger, with people pulling out phones and whispering excitedly. Some tried to approach for selfies or autographs, but Manny's security team formed a discreet barrier, while the champion remained focused entirely on Bayani. This wasn't about publicity or photo opportunities. This was about something infinitely more personal and meaningful. Bayani seemed to understand instinctively that he shouldn't move away, despite the overwhelming attention. There was an invisible thread connecting him to Manny, a shared experience that transcended their current circumstances. The boy's posture had changed from nervous excitement to something resembling quiet dignity, as if Manny's respectful treatment had reminded him of his own worth. Manny found himself studying the boy's hands, noting the ink stains and small calluses that marked someone who worked with his hands daily. These were the same markings he had carried as a child, badges of honest labor that told stories of determination and sacrifice. The sight stirred something protective and paternal within him. The champion began to notice other details that painted a picture of Bayani's life. The boy's worn sneakers had been repaired multiple times with tape and glue, yet they were clean despite their age. His clothes, though faded and patched, were neat and cared for. These signs spoke of a family that maintained dignity despite their circumstances, taking pride in their appearance even when resources were scarce. As the minutes passed, Manny observed how Bayani handled the attention from the growing crowd. The boy didn't become demanding or pushy, trying to capitalize on the moment for additional sales. Instead, he maintained a respectful distance, seeming to understand that this was Manny's time and space. This maturity in someone so young was both impressive and heartbreaking. The champion could see calculation happening behind Bayani's eyes, not scheming or manipulation, but the practical consideration of someone who had learned to think several steps ahead. The boy was probably wondering if he should return to work, if this magical moment was over, if he had somehow earned the right to hope for something beyond this brief encounter. Manny's own internal struggle was becoming more intense with each passing second. Every instinct told him that walking away now would be impossible, that some force greater than coincidence had brought them together. The newspapers in his hands felt like a contract, a commitment that demanded something more than a simple purchase. The moment had arrived for a decision that would define not just the rest of this day, but potentially change the course of both their lives. Manny knew that what happened next would either be a beautiful memory or the beginning of something transformational. Manny made a gesture that surprised even his own security team. Instead of preparing to leave, he indicated his intention to stay longer, to follow Bayani through his daily routine. The boy's eyes widened with a mixture of confusion and wonder, unsure if he was interpreting the champion's intentions correctly. The decision felt natural to Manny, as if guided by some deeper purpose. He had spent years giving back to his community through organized charities and public events, but this felt different. This was personal, immediate, and connected to the very core of who he had been before fame transformed his life. He needed to understand Bayani's world completely, not just observe it from a distance. Bayani seemed to grasp that he had gained an unexpected companion for his workday. The boy's behavior shifted from nervous excitement to focused determination. As if he wanted to prove himself worthy of this extraordinary attention, he began moving through his routine with renewed energy, showing Manny the intricacies of his small business operation. The champion watched as Bayani approached potential customers with remarkable skill for someone so young. The boy had developed a keen sense of timing, knowing exactly when to approach someone and when to respectfully maintain distance. His technique was sophisticated, built through experience that no business school could provide. As they moved through the streets together, Manny noticed how other vendors treated Bayani. There was a community among these street workers, a network of support and mutual respect that reminded him of his own childhood experiences. Elderly vendors would nod approvingly at the boy, and some would even redirect customers to him when they had already made their own sales for the day. The most striking moment came when they passed an older woman selling vegetables from a small cart. Her weathered hands and kind eyes immediately reminded Manny of his own mother during those difficult years. She looked at Bayani with genuine affection, the kind of care that extended families provided in tight-knit communities. When she noticed Manny walking with the boy, her expression shifted to one of protective concern mixed with curiosity. Bayani's route through the neighborhood revealed a strategic understanding of his market that impressed Manny deeply. The boy knew which corners had the highest foot traffic at different times of day, which businesses had employees who regularly bought newspapers, and which areas to avoid when certain officials were making their rounds. This wasn't random wandering. This was a carefully planned business operation run by a child who had been forced to think like an adult. The champion began to notice the physical toll this work took on Bayani's small body. The boy would subtly shift the weight of his remaining newspapers from arm to arm, trying to manage the strain without showing weakness. His breathing became slightly labored as the morning progressed, but he never slowed his pace or showed any sign of giving up. What moved Manny most was witnessing Bayani's interactions with regular customers. There were office workers who clearly looked forward to seeing the boy each day, treating him with kindness that went beyond mere transaction. These brief moments of human connection seemed to energize Bayani more than rest or food could. As they continued walking together, Manny found himself calculating numbers in his head. How much did Bayani need to earn each day? How many newspapers did that require? How many hours of work in the heat and noise of Manila streets? The mathematics of survival that he remembered so clearly from his own childhood. The morning was progressing, and Manny knew that soon he would need to make a decision that would define this encounter forever. The newspapers in his hands had become a symbol of something much larger, and he could feel the weight of possibility pressing down on him. As the sun climbed higher in the Manila sky, Manny noticed Bayani's newspaper stack had dwindled to just a few remaining copies. The boy's face showed a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion as he counted the money in his plastic bag one more time. The day's work was nearly complete, and Manny realized he was about to witness something even more profound than the boy's street vending skills. Bayani began walking in a direction that led away from the busier commercial streets toward a more residential area of Tondo. Manny followed, his security team maintaining their discreet distance while ensuring their safety. The change in scenery was gradual but significant, moving from concrete storefronts to narrow alleyways lined with modest homes built closely together. The champion observed how Bayani's demeanor shifted as they entered what was clearly his neighborhood. The boy's shoulders relaxed slightly, and his pace quickened with the familiarity of someone who knew every crack in the pavement, every shortcut between buildings. This was his territory, where he was known not as a small vendor in a vast city, but as someone's son, someone's neighbor. Children playing in the narrow streets recognized Bayani and waved, some pointing excitedly at Manny walking behind him. The boxer could see the pride in their eyes as they realized their friend was somehow connected to this famous figure. For Bayani, this moment must have felt like the ultimate validation of his worth in the eyes of his peers. The houses they passed told stories of families doing their best with limited resources. Laundry hung on improvised lines strung between buildings, small gardens grew in recycled containers, and the sounds of daily life echoed from open windows. It was a community where people looked out for each other, where children played safely in the streets because everyone's eyes were watching protectively. Manny felt a deep recognition as they moved deeper into the neighborhood. This could have been his own childhood street, filled with the same mixture of struggle and hope, the same sense of community that emerged when people faced similar challenges together. The sights, sounds, and smells triggered memories so vivid he could almost feel himself shrinking back to childhood size. As they approached a particular house, Bayani's steps slowed slightly. Manny could see the boy gathering himself, preparing for something important. The house was small but well-maintained, with a tiny garden where vegetables grew in carefully tended rows. Someone had painted the exterior walls in cheerful blue, and clean curtains hung in the windows despite their obvious age. The champion noticed Bayani checking his appearance one final time, smoothing his shirt and adjusting his newspapers before approaching the front door. This ritual spoke of a child who understood the importance of presenting himself properly to his family, who took pride in returning home as a contributor rather than a burden. Manny could hear voices from inside the house, the sounds of a family going about their daily routine. There were female voices, possibly a mother and sisters, and the clatter of cooking utensils that suggested meal preparation was underway. The domestic sounds painted a picture of a family that functioned as a unit, each member contributing to their collective survival. The boy hesitated for just a moment at the threshold, perhaps gathering courage or simply savoring the moment of returning home with a successful day's earnings. Manny could see the weight of responsibility in that pause. The knowledge that inside this house were people depending on what he had managed to earn through his morning's work. In that moment, Manny understood that he was about to witness something sacred, the intersection of childhood innocence and adult responsibility that defined Bayani's daily existence. Whatever happened next would reveal the true impact of this boy's work on his family's life. Bayani pushed open the wooden door, and the scene that greeted Manny inside the small house struck him with an emotional force that nearly brought tears to his eyes. The interior was sparse but immaculately clean, with every item serving a specific purpose. A woman in her 30s, clearly Bayani's mother Imelda, was bent over a small gas stove, stirring something in a pot with the focused attention of someone making the most of limited ingredients. Two younger children sat at a small wooden table, a girl around 8 years old and a boy who couldn't have been more than 6. They were sharing a single pencil, taking turns working on what appeared to be homework written on scraps of paper rather than proper notebooks. The scene painted a picture of a family that prioritized education despite their circumstances, finding ways to learn even when resources were scarce. Manny watched as Bayani approached his mother with obvious pride, carefully extracting the day's earnings from his plastic bag. Imelda's face transformed as she saw the money, her expression shifting from concentrated worry to visible relief. The champion could see her quickly calculating in her head, determining what this income would allow them to have for lunch and perhaps dinner. The house itself told a story of resourcefulness and dignity, Cardboard had been carefully cut and arranged to create privacy dividers, while colorful fabric draped over wooden crates served as both storage and decoration. Family photographs, though faded, were prominently displayed, showing happier times and maintaining a sense of family history and pride. What moved Manny most profoundly was observing the family's unspoken communication system. The younger children immediately made space at the table when they saw Bayani return, understanding without words that their older brother needed to rest. Imelda glanced toward the pot on the stove, mentally adjusting portions to ensure everyone would have enough to eat from whatever she was preparing. The champion noticed small details that spoke volumes about this family's values. Despite their poverty, there were books stacked neatly in one corner, some clearly borrowed from a library or donated by others. Religious imagery decorated one wall, suggesting faith played an important role in helping them endure their challenges. Most telling of all, there was no television or expensive electronics, yet the atmosphere felt rich with love and mutual support. Bayani's siblings looked at their brother with obvious admiration, recognizing his contribution to the family's survival. The 8-year-old girl, who Manny learned was named Maritiz, helped organize Bayani's remaining newspapers, while the youngest boy, Thomas, brought his brother a cup of water without being asked. These gestures revealed a family unit where everyone understood their role in the collective effort to survive. Manny found himself thinking about his own family during their most difficult years, remembering how his mother, Dionysia, had performed similar miracles with limited resources. The way Imelda moved around the small kitchen, maximizing every ingredient and making sure nothing went to waste, brought back powerful memories of his own childhood meals that were stretched to feed everyone. The presence of Manny himself seemed to create a surreal atmosphere in the small house. Imelda had clearly recognized him by now, but she continued her cooking with determined focus, perhaps not wanting to acknowledge the impossibility of the situation until she better understood what was happening. Her children kept stealing glances at the famous visitor while trying to maintain their normal routine. As Manny stood in this humble home, surrounded by a family that embodied everything he remembered about his own upbringing, he felt a clarity of purpose that had been building throughout the entire morning. This wasn't coincidence or chance encounter. This was destiny, presenting him with an opportunity to transform lives in the most direct and meaningful way possible. The moment for a decision that would change everything had finally arrived. Manny reached into his jacket and withdrew something that would forever alter the trajectory of this family's existence. It wasn't just money, though financial support would certainly be part of what was to come. What he pulled out was his phone, and the calls he was about to make would set in motion a series of events that none of them could have imagined when the day began. The champion's first call was to his foundation's coordinator, providing the family's address and specific instructions that would ensure immediate relief. Food deliveries would begin that very day, but more importantly, long-term support systems would be established. Bayani would never again need to sell newspapers on dangerous streets to help his family survive. As Manny made his arrangements, he watched the family's growing realization that their lives were about to change fundamentally. Imelda's hands trembled as she continued stirring the pot, probably afraid to believe that this miraculous intervention was real. The children remained quiet, sensing the gravity of the moment even if they couldn't fully comprehend its implications. The second call was to an educational scholarship coordinator. Manny provided detailed information about all 3 children, ensuring that their academic futures would be secured from elementary school through university. Bayani's intelligence and work ethic had already proven his potential. Now he would have the opportunity to develop it properly. Manny's third call addressed the family's housing situation. Through his connections with local development projects, he arranged for the family to be relocated to a proper apartment with adequate space, running water, and reliable electricity. The transition would happen gradually, allowing them to maintain their community connections while dramatically improving their living conditions. But perhaps the most significant call was to a small business development program that Manny supported. Imelda would receive training and startup capital to establish her own small enterprise, providing sustainable income that would allow her to work from home while caring for her children. The days of depending on a 10-year-old's dangerous street work were officially over. As each phone call concluded, Manny found himself looking at Bayani with a mixture of pride and protection. This boy had reminded him of his own journey, but more importantly, he had shown him the power of recognizing potential and acting on it. The newspapers they had shared that morning had become a bridge between Manny's past struggles and this family's future possibilities. The transformation began immediately. Within hours, delivery trucks would arrive with groceries, school supplies, and basic necessities. Representatives from various organizations would visit to begin the process of enrolling the children in quality schools and setting up Imelda's business training program. Manny spent the remaining time in their home, observing the subtle changes already taking place. The weight of constant worry was lifting from Imelda's shoulders, and the children were beginning to imagine possibilities they had never dared to dream. Bayani himself seemed to be processing the magnitude of what had occurred, understanding that his life's direction had just shifted dramatically. Before leaving, Manny made one final gesture that would become legendary in the neighborhood. He left behind not just financial support, but his personal contact information, making it clear that this wasn't a one-time charitable act, but the beginning of a long-term relationship. Bayani would have a mentor, the family would have ongoing support, and Manny would have the satisfaction of completing a circle that had begun with his own childhood struggles. As Manny walked away from the small blue house, he carried with him the knowledge that sometimes the most profound impacts come from the simplest recognitions. A boy selling newspapers had reminded him of his own journey and provided him with the opportunity to change the course of several lives. The newspapers he still carried would be preserved as a reminder of the day when destiny disguised itself as coincidence, and when the simple act of recognition transformed into life-changing action. Thank you for watching another episode of Champion Stories. If you enjoyed today's story, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming inspiring tales about Manny Pacquiao. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one, and many times your ideas inspire our next episode. See you next time.